Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape podcast. With us today is artist and co-collaborator for the new story you might have seen on comixology that's now coming to print, Dudley Datson, and the Forever Machine. Jamal, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. As we like to ask everyone, it's funny enough, as all the jobs could have gone, of all the collections, of all the things that we could have gone into, we all share this passion for comic books. What led you to this road?
To be honest, it just sort of seemed like something that was always there. I was surrounded by spec fiction since I was a kid. I'm a 70s kid, so as far back as I remember, it's like 66 Batman and the Incredible Hulk, and then like Electra Woman and Dinah Girl and the Crossover Show, the Spider-Man TV series with Nicholas Hammond, $6 Million Man, Buck Rogers. So all that stuff was kind of there, but I think the tipping point for me was when my grandfather took me to see the original Christopher Reeve Superman.
Nice. And that must have been great with the documentary coming out, kind of seeing that come full circle. Christopher Reeve coming back. Yeah,
I really want to see it.
Now, what's also impressive, besides the comic books that you got in the work on, I know before it said that you've also worked on some TV shows, especially some CGI shows. Roughneck was probably one of my favorite shows growing up.
That was a fun show to work on. I ended up becoming a real big fan of Robert Heinlein and then Paul Verhoeven as well.
Yeah, and it's funny. Back in those times, man, those shows were so ahead of their times. Because if it wasn't for that, CGI Roughnecks really shaped me. Beast Wars, and I think it was Voltron: The Third Dimension that was also three-dimensional, and that really launched a lot of things besides the comic books. That really launched me deep into the fandom.
I don't know if you remember this. I don't remember if you remember this show. There was also a show that I worked on at the same time called Max Steel that was on the WB.
I do indeed.
So I storyboarded 2 episodes of that show at the same time I was working on Roughnecks.
That's incredible. And it's funny because I'm surprised we don't do more CGI shows because I really enjoyed them. I know that things change and style changes, but back then I always wonder if they didn't maybe get the appreciation they deserve for just how far ahead of their time they were.
Well, it was far ahead of the time. It was also expensive. It's a very expensive thing to do. Like TV CGI is really, really expensive to do. And at the time, there was a lot of stuff that we couldn't do in CGI that they can do much more easily now. Like animating water was really hard back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, no, I definitely believe that, and I have seen it. But yeah, it's still all fantastic. Now you obviously worked on these shows, and was this during kind of your intro and getting into comic books? Because I think you did some interning as well.
I did. Well, I mean, my career in comics is fairly complicated. So I was an intern at DC when I was in high school, my senior year of high school. And then I did some comics work in the early 90s. So I worked on like Green Lantern, and then I worked on some of the early Milestone books like Cobalt.
Yeah.
And so I was doing that. And then I got out of comics for a bit, for like a year or two. And then I ended up working for Billy Tucci at Crusade around 1996, I want to say. So that was sort of like my return to comics for a bit. So I worked for him. I was doing a lot of independent work for a couple of years in between, like, because I had a Joe job.
Yeah.
And then, that's how I ended up working in animation. It was sort of like a segue between like doing like these indie comic jobs while I was doing my marketing job, and then seeing an ad in the back of Animation Magazine looking for storyboard artists. So I applied and I got the job, and ended up moving to California within like weeks of getting the job.
That's awesome. Now, in your path, was it more difficult going from kind of comic book work to animation, or back again from animation back to kind of comic book work?
Ooh. I don't know. I always kind of saw them as being parallel. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a storyboard artist, so the mechanics are pretty much the same. I think the only real consideration for storyboards in particular is learning how to do the timing, because you're listening as you're boarding the pages. You're also listening to the dialogue tracks from the voice actors. You're reading the script. You're talking to the director. You're talking to the producer. There's meetings, lots and lots of meetings.
Always.
But with comics, it's usually just me and the writer initially, whoever I'm working with, whoever I'm partnering with. And then on the back end, it's me working with the colorist and the inker and the letterer, and having a very clear view of how I want things to look.
Definitely.
So it's more direct with comics, but it's very similar in terms of just like storytelling, building drama, trying to figure out how to make things work visually so that they're interesting.
Exactly. Well, and I always wondered too, coming back from storyboarding and kind of having that experience where you're making that storyboard and then you're seeing it come to CGI. Did that help kind of your comic book process? Because now you could put something almost in panel, but then kind of visualize, okay, well, if this was 3D, I could see where this would work.
Oh yeah, no. I always consider my time at Sony as storytelling boot camp, almost. Like, because the way that we were working, because it was CGI, nothing had to be on model. So you were just concentrating on camera placement, how the characters were moving. You didn't have to worry about them looking exactly like, their sheet model. And that wouldn't have been my job anyway. That would have been handed off to the finisher. But because we were also doing the storyboard, because the way that we were doing the storyboards at the time is we were drawing everything on Post-it notes. And then, so that it would be easier to edit the boards and swap things out and move things around. And then those would get finalized by the director and then set to the to shot for the animatic that would be would at the time been sent to the animators who were in Korea.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I can see where it definitely kind of helped out. Now, what's also impressive about your career is obviously you did work with DC. You also did work at Marvel. And I've always wanted to ask. There's very few people that can say that I've worked for both powerhouses in the comic book industry. Do you find it beneficial having seen, because you have two companies that are so similar yet so different that have built empires? Were you able to take a little bit of kind of away from each one of it, and now as you're making your comics, you find yourself kind of meshing maybe what you took from a little bit from each?
I think so, but I think because my tenure at DC was so much longer than my tenure at Marvel, I think a lot of, especially like the superhero stuff, is more influenced from my time at DC. than Marvel. My time at Marvel was relatively brief. I mean, I still occasionally work for DC. So you're talking at this point a 30-year relationship, somewhere in that range. So I'm then definitely coming from the fan aspect. I lean more towards the DC characters and the
Definitely.
DC style of storytelling. But even as like from a kid, like that was always my thing. Like Superman was my favorite character. So that's always been the DC universe has always been much closer to me, I think, than the Marvel universe. But it's also with comics, like everybody works everywhere eventually.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people do end up going back and forth between companies. You very rarely have a situation where a person mostly or almost entirely works at one company. I think the rare exception is probably like Jose Luis Garcia Lopez.
Yeah, I about to say there's at this point most people generally do. And if you don't work for both or all companies or a little bit of each company, at this point you're kind of making a ghost machine and you're just getting all your friends together to make your own comic book company. Which has to be fun. Now with that trend, have you ever thought about kind of, is that the general trend with artists and writers now, just kind of seeing that James Tinian and Geoff Johns make these companies, just being like, yeah, you know what, I would like to make a company with my friends and kind of directly do what we want to do and kind of put our money into like our own stories and get that back as well.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, a lot of it I feel like is sort of like an offshoot of Image, like the early Image model. You know what I mean?
I do.
So I think there is that. I think for me, however, it's difficult to say. So one of the other projects that I do is Raw Earth for Ahoy Comics. I've been working on that book for 7 years.
Yeah.
And that's probably like the longest creative relationship on a single project that I've had, working with Tom Payer. So, but also working with Scott on Dudley Datson over at Best Jacket, and Scott doing his thing over there. And, kind of as a writer at least, being kind of one man banding it.
Exactly. Now, one of the things too with making these comics and having so much experience under your belt, have you ever started making one and as soon as you got done with the comic, especially Dudley Datson, this seems like the perfect chance to put out another CGI show or another show. This is ripe for television.
It's hard not to think in those terms, I think, sometimes, especially when you're trying to develop a new IP. I mean, the possibilities are always there, of course. But to be honest, I think, my background kind of lends itself to that as well.
Yeah.
Outside comics, working in marketing and advertising. So, and having had the TV and movie experiences that I've had, but I think, there's at least, I would be lying if I didn't say that there was a part of me that doesn't think toyetically. Like, wow, this could be a cool action figure. This could be a cool this could be a cool that, But it's not the first thing that popped into my mind. I think it's just sort of baked into the cake that is Jamal at this point.
Part of your brand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now would you say that this book, if you had to pick one kind of as your later project, kind of really defines your art style and the story you want to tell?
Ooh, that's tough. I think that's tough because, I mean, stylistically, it is me.
Yeah.
It is the purest version of me. But I could say the same thing about the Longer. I think, everything that I've been doing for the last decade or so has really been based out of of the choice of wanting to do fun things and things that I can really get behind and things that I could put 100% of my effort into. I mean, it's not worth it. It's not fun, and I have to have fun first, especially if you're going to be on something for a year or 7 years.
Definitely. No, I think we've all read a comic book where we could tell the writer and the artist or one or the other was not into it, and you see the storyline. Oh yeah, and it's just a tragedy all the way around for everyone, for sure. Now, as a writer, I know your background. You've had a lot of classical training, a lot of art training, and a lot of people listening will always ask, what's the one advice? And no one ever wants to hear, you got to put in your hours and you just got to draw.
Right.
So if you had to give one more piece of advice, maybe more specific, like, really focus on your line work, try inking, any type of like things like that. Do you think you have another piece of advice you'd give like budding artists in the comic industry to, really sit down and try to practice this?
Okay. So what I usually tell my students is that they should be striving for verisimilitude. And the idea of creating a world, a believable world. That doesn't mean that it has to be 100% realistic, but the rules of that world have to be consistent, both in the writing and in the art. Visually, you have to hone the look that you want the world to have, and that everything in that world looks the way that it does because you say it does. And that then the reader believes that the world exists because you say that it does. So that means making sure that figures exist in a living space. That if you're going to draw things in perspective, that the perspective be tight, and that the figures don't look like they're out of place. That things like lighting and things thinking about the overall feel and mood that you're going for. These things are all very, very important. And I think more than anything else, we fall in love with atmosphere and mood.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I would say one of my favorite examples, and that's a great piece of advice for anyone listening. DC Dark. When you look, there are maybe 4 or 5 issues, but the general theme and how they carry the story is just so well structured. I mean, Zatanna Bring Down the House has to be one of my favorites this year because they just nailed it from start to finish.
They do such a great job with that story.
Yeah, definitely.
I've been catching up on
it. Yeah. No, that's a great piece of advice, and I think that's really key for people to kind of focus in on, especially for artists. There's nothing worse than seeing a random placed object, and then sometimes obviously as readers we won't notice, and it's fun to put little things here, but when I see like everyone has a square head and then all of a sudden you start drawing circles again, I'm gonna wonder, was this purposeful? Did he just forget? Should I pay attention to this? Should I not?
It's very much that idea, especially younger artists. They don't really want to do all the necessary steps to make sure that there are the things that are drawing on their pages all have symmetry.
Exactly. So yes, for any artists that are listening, this is a great piece of advice. Definitely put it in the repertoire. Now that brings us to the whole point why we're here for the show. You and Scott have been working on a book that I found randomly on Comixology, and then I got an email that, would you guys like to talk about? And I'm very excited because my dad raised me on reruns of Peabody and Sherman and Mr. Peabody. So when I read the paragraph for what this book was, and then I said, I get the chance, I am all for it. How did you guys come about this story? Who approached who? Where did this start?
Well, I mean, if you really want to know how it started, it goes back quite a few years to when the first time I met Scott, which was at a signing at St. Mark's Comics, probably 15 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
And this was before Scott became Scott Snyder. So, but I met him, we talked, we hung out a little bit, and apparently he always remembered me. And then when we were both at DC, when he started doing detective, and I was working, I forget what I was working, I think I was working on Firestorm at the time, and we could run into each other in the hallway, and then try to figure out how to work together. And things never really came together. And then a couple of years ago, Scott reaches out to me via email, and he says he's working on this thing, he's working on this project. He's got a couple of different projects that he thought that I'd be really good for, and he pitched me the book that he ended up doing with Gabe Sherman, Fire Country. And then he pitched me Dudley, and I felt like Dudley was, of the two projects, I felt like Dudley was the one that fit my sensibilities more. So that's basically how it started. So, but this was like a bucket list kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like the opportunity to work with Scott was something that I've been wanting to do for so long, and to get to do it on something like this it was really, really a dream come true. So.
Definitely. Now, for everyone listening, if you had to give the quick Comic-Con, selling paragraph or sell what this book is about, how would you describe it?
How would I describe it? A teenage genius inherits a gold watch that can travel through space and time, and he's saddled with a talking dog.
Now I have to know, is there a little bit of Sherman and Mr. Peabody in there? Because there has to be.
There's a little Sherman and Mr. Peabody. There's a little Doctor Who. I mean, it's Sherman and Mr. Peabody, and Sherman and Mr. Peabody don't like each other.
that is true. Sherman likes Mr. Peabody. Mr. Peabody, maybe not Sherman.
Yeah, exactly. Sherman's not exactly sure what Mr. Peabody's motives are.
Exactly.
But it's an adventure. I mean, for me, it's I don't know how old you are, but there used to be this TV show called Voyagers.
I am
back in the 80s. I was always a big fan of that unfortunately, ended tragically with the lead actor, but I'm a big Doctor Who fan. I'm a big science fiction fan, and it was the opportunity to do a pure sci-fi story also, and it hit all my sensibilities. It hit my love of science fiction, my love of YA adventure stories, my love of history, and, the excuse to do tons of research on stuff. Visual research on stuff.
Exactly. And I think everyone likes a good time traveling story when you look at how popular, again, Doctor Who is a big one. Love every season for a long time. Sliders is always one of my favorite. I wish they'd come back and finish that story. I hate the way that ended. Yes, even Star Trek Voyager. I mean, when you look at everyone at some point, you came across, Quantum Leap, fantastic. Another ending that I wish could be rectified, but I digress on that. But yeah, I'm happy to see it, and I feel like you guys hit this book at the right time, because I feel like a lot of people are starting to come back to that kind of old school mystery, Hardy Boys, and again, science fiction level stuff.
Oh yeah,
because we've seen the superhero stuff, and I almost feel like everyone's we've had too much of it, and we're looking for that detox, and this is like the perfect story for that.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and I feel like, especially like working on it was so much fun. Having the freedom also to be able to finesse things.
Yeah.
Visually. And to have somebody, not just Scott, but our editor Will Dennis, our anchor Juan Castro, our colorist Chris Mayor, like Tom Napolitano, the letterer, like this is like I got to put my team together.
Yeah.
I got to do something fun and different and just cool. Like I just think it's a cool project.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely shows. Like I said, the cohesiveness, the colors, the drawing, everything just comes together so well. Now for this project, no, besides the art, you had a pretty good portion of contributing to the story itself, and you put a lot of your own stuff into this. Did that feel different instead of just having like Scott, like, here's my scripts, please draw it, but instead he's like, here's my scripts, and you're like, yeah, I like this, let me put this in, let me draw this. Was it weird?
It's having the ability to compromise, story-wise, and being able to collaborate with somebody who's willing to listen to your ideas. And I've been very lucky in that regard in a lot of the things that I've worked on. But this is one of those projects where my DNA is all over the book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I designed the logo. I did all the color designs for all the characters. Like I built this out. This is the one of the projects where I am so much a part of what this project is about. And having somebody like Scott who was open to my suggestions and open to the things that I wanted to do and the areas that I wanted to explore. It's a rarity in creative circles in general. I've been very lucky over the years to have multiple people that I've worked with who have been more than willing to trust me and trust that I know what I think works visually.
Yeah, no, and again, I think it shows through the cohesiveness of the book itself. Speaking of color, and your input on that, I have to say one of the fun things is always when I see different colors. A lot of comic books have gone to grayscale tones, a lot of dark tones. I was about to say Scott's new Batman, that's completely almost all black. And I think one of the best things about science fiction that's so nice is you can use these pinks, these blues, these oranges, these vials for chemicals. You have space. Time can't even be perceived as our concept, or time could be whatever you want it to be. Is that the fun part, kind of coloring a book like this or picking colors, just knowing that you have such a limitless palette and you don't have to be stuck with, Gotham black or Superman blue. Like you can go the whole palette.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It really depends on the project, and I kind of like to let the characters themselves drive me. So like for Dudley in particular, I specifically dressed him in red, black, and green.
Yeah.
Which are like, African American colors. But yeah, I mean, it's stuff like that. You take the characters, as you're designing them, and you try to find ways to make them different and to make them pop visually. Like, for example, an issue in the book, we have a Minotaur who's like a cyborg Minotaur, but he's blue instead of brown. And I think part of that was like me making the connection between like the big blue locks, and but also this is an alien.
Yeah.
Let's push the alienness of that idea. Let's find a shade of blue that most people wouldn't think of using.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what makes it so fun to read books like this is seeing a color you're not used to, getting you to perceive something that you're not used to perceiving. And again,
Oh
it
yeah.
comes out really well in the story. Now, telling a story like this, where time is involved and essentially dimensions are involved,
Mm.
the story is technically infinite. As soon as you cross a time threshold to a degree, you've made an infinite universe. Did you
Right.
guys have a set start and stop for this story, or at least the arc, or is this one where you said, well, because we have infinite possibilities, let's just start putting the story out and just we'll kind of go with it?
Well,
And
the idea was to leave this first book open ended so that there will
okay,
be room to do more stories with
yeah,
Dudley, but leaving it in without spoiling, of course, leaving things in a good starting place for further adventure. So, I mean,
definitely,
and I think that's the best way to handle those kinds of stories.
yeah,
I mean, part of the problem is more of a logistical problem more than anything else. It's like Scott and I both have really busy schedules with a lot of different things going on. So when we do another Dudley book, we want to be able to just sort of like pick up from where we left off and not have to worry about like figuring out like it's not a monthly comic. We don't have to worry about filling the
yeah,
space in between. We don't set it at a particular time. It's just modern day.
yeah. And that's nice too, not having that kind of that crunch time for New Comic Wednesday, knowing that
Right.
we could take a break from it and we can come back and really kind of take that break away and think about where we want to go with the story,
Oh yeah,
which I think is definitely helpful
absolutely.
considering someone that's under the whip and chain of the major comic book people. Um, Now, what the best part about this comic book, and Dudley is a fun character. Number one, he had such a heartbreaking first episode or issue. I felt like
Oh
everything
yeah,
just went
poor
wrong.
kid.
Everything just went wrong for him. Um, that was just at the end of it. I was like, man, this is how we're ending issue one. He did not
Yeah,
gain
I
anything.
know.
Um, the second thing that I really liked was the animal companion. I always love every story that has one. I more like when people use different animals. One was from
Mhm.
Vault Comics. I think they had a baby hippo that followed someone.
Right.
And all your little animals that you did through time. I mean, Daedalus,
Yeah,
great
yeah.
character. Was it kind of daunting as you had you had so many animals to choose from as and obviously history dictates some of it because you could pull from history, but
Right,
you
right.
also then had the freedom to if you want to do someone had a pet snail or a little monkey, like you could put it into the story. How did you guys go about deciding, this like we're gonna have some permanent ones, but let's do some fun animals?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of that came from Scott in the script. I mean, Daedalus was always going to be a dog, but the type of dog uh, was that was me just kind of saying, yeah, I want Daedalus to be a corgi. Because I'd never drawn a project where I had to draw a dog all the time. And corgis are freaking hard to draw. So I like
Yeah.
the challenge of like learning to draw a corgi.
Yes, corgis. I will say it's not one you see for some reason. I feel like pugs are high up on the list.
Oh
That's
yeah.
always like
Well,
a go
it's
to.
also one of those things. Like I hadn't even before I started working on Dudley, like I hadn't really realized how many corgis are around me on any given day in New York City. Like corgis are everywhere, man.
They're watching you. They're ready to give you the watch. If you had the chance and Scott said, you know what, I want you to pick like your own animal that we're gonna put into like your own companion, or even drawing yourself with your own companion. Do you have an animal that you would pick as your time companion?
Well, I mean, I have a dog. I have a pit bull lab mix named Gambino.
Nice.
So It's nowhere near as smart as Daedalus, unfortunately. But that would be my companion.
Yeah.
Stuck like glue.
Definitely. Now, as fun as this project was to kind of co-write and kind of draw and work with Scott, was there any part that, even though it was like 99% all fun, was there like 1% where you're like, man, this is actually a lot more challenging than I kind of thought it was going to be?
What was surprisingly challenging is we have this scene that takes place at an amusement park. And for whatever reason, there's Dudley and Ono and Daedalus are on the top of this water slide at this amusement park. And for whatever reason, like trying to logistically make this interesting with them like in this kind of finite space at night in this amusement park. That for some reason that was really really hard. The other is the fight towards the end in the power station.
Okay, yeah. Was it just
that
so
was more of a detailed thing than anything?
I about to say, I figured so much going on, especially when you get components and like panels. That has to get tiring. Where you're just like, I just don't want to draw one more button. It's just so many.
Another piece of rebar, another gangway.
How many cracks is too many cracks in the window? Just enough.
Exactly.
Now, obviously, you guys have kind of a start and stop, like where you could move with the story kind of at your own pace when you have time. Do you have arcs currently scheduled? Like, we're going to leave them in a decent spot through this first arc, but these are like our top 5 ideas when we come back to it or when we're working on it.
No, not yet. We haven't really had a chance to talk about it because Scott's been busy with the absolute, like DC All In and all that stuff, and then I've been busy with like The Wrong Earth and a lot of other projects that I've been working on. So we haven't really had a chance to kind of like sit down and say, hey, if we're going to do more Dudley, let's do this.
Okay. But it sounds like it's going to be pretty easy for both of you guys to kind of come together and make the story. Now, even more better, which I love comixology. I think it's a great way because you can reach so many people in the blink of an eye. There are a lot of comics that come up on comixology that do not get an actual physical release. I am happy that this one is getting a physical release. For a book like this, is this more of kind of trade paperback that we're getting in physical release, or is this going to be?
It's going to be as a trade paperback. It's like 192 pages, so it's a big, hefty piece.
That's a big book.
Yeah, it's a big book. So,
now, what's really fun with the story like this is obviously you're going to have a main cover. You can even choose the cover of a book you've already done. Being that there's so many people that have worked on this and it was so fun, have you guys thought about doing variant trade paperbacks, or at this point you're just ready to kind of get that volume 1 out?
I think probably just getting the variant out. I haven't seen the finish of the trade paperback. But for the single issues, we had covers by Corey Randolph and Cliff Kane and Ariel Christiana and like Steve Ellis, and we just had like, and then I ended up doing like 6 covers or something.
Definitely. And now, is this a release too that, as we look at the numbers, like if the physical release does well enough? Obviously, we'll probably still do comixology because you probably got a lot of fans that are looking forward to it now on comixology. But would this be more of a guaranteed than physical release? As long as the numbers add up to?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's definitely interest both on comixology and Dark Horse's part to do more and to have another physical release.
Definitely. Well, I'm hoping that there are more physical releases, because when I was reading it and then I read that this was coming out in physical print, I was like, man, if they could do like a time machine, like little book box that everything comes into, with like a little door that opens with like the animals inside. So that would just be that would add up for me. That'd be pretty much on my list. So when are we going to be getting this physical release?
This month, actually, October. So I think it's coming up towards the end of the month.
Okay. Now I'm assuming obviously Amazon will have it, but will this also be at pretty much all your local LCSs and like Barnes and Noble? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect. Do you happen to know the exact date of release?
No, I don't, unfortunately.
That's fine. Well, but everyone listening, when I have this up, we'll get to the bottom of this. We'll get that date up.
Right.
But I am excited for it. I think everyone that gives it a chance and reads it, I think they're gonna love it. Like I said, if you're a big fan of time and space, this is, like I said, one of the perfect adventures for a market that's saturated in the same story. This is kind of the well-needed break. And I was very excited to read it. For everyone wanting to stay up to date on this story and what you're working on, where are the best place to follow you and keep up to date with this story?
Okay, so the best place to follow me is at my website, which is jamaligle.com. But I'm pretty easy to find. If you use Google and type my name in, I'm going to pop up.
Easily found.
Easily found. Unfortunately, sometimes, but easily found.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for coming on and answering. Like I said, this is a fun book. Everyone listening, it's coming out this month. Go check it out. Get a copy. Jamal, we can't wait to talk to you some more, hopefully in the future when this keeps releasing. And it's a fun story, and we're happy to have you on.
Thanks, Ryan. It was my pleasure.
All right. Well, that's it, everyone. We hope you enjoyed. If you are listening to this or watching on YouTube, hit subscribe, follow us, follow Jamal, and check out Dudley Datson and the Forever Machine. Everyone listening, have a good night.